Welcome to the Canadian Hydrogen Convention's Hydrogen Plus series. I'm Rachel Gregory. Joining us today is Dr. David Layzell, Energy Systems Architect, the Transition Accelerator. David, welcome. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
David, Canada has made a commitment to reach net zero emissions by 2050. Do you believe this is doable, and are we on the right track?
I certainly think it's doable, but we're certainly not on track. The Canadian government and industry still seem to be thinking that one can achieve these dramatic changes we require in the structure of our energy system through small incremental changes that are driven by the price on carbon and a few regulations. And I just don't think that's credible, or I don't think that's correct. What we really need, and we lack now, is a shared understanding of the characteristics of a credible net zero emission energy future. So we need a clear view of where we need to go before we can get there. I think as Yogi Berra says, if you don't know where you're going, you'll end up somewhere else.
How does a net zero emission energy system differ from the current energy system that drives our economy today?
Half of our greenhouse gas emissions today in Canada derive from the distributed combustion of fossil fuel-based energy carriers. And another 30% of our emissions come from the production of those energy carriers and from the production of electricity. So I think it's actually pretty simple. If we're going to get to net zero emission energy system, we need to do two things. We need to replace our fossil carbon-based energy carriers with zero emission energy carriers like electricity or hydrogen. And we also need to change the technologies that we use to make these energy carriers so they don't have greenhouse gas emissions as well. It doesn't mean that we have to leave our fossil fuels in the ground. It just means we have to leave the carbon in the ground, and then we can tap in our vast fossil fuel resources.
David, why is hydrogen so important for Canada right now, and why should people be paying attention?
Electricity, which is made with very low or no greenhouse gas emission, is a fantastic energy carrier. But it's very expensive and challenging to store. So some sectors, they really can't use essentially electricity as the energy carrier. They need chemically based energy carriers or zero emission energy carriers. And that's where hydrogen comes in. Or its derivatives of hydrogen like ammonia, where they are really a better choice than the other zero emission energy carrier electricity, are areas like heavy duty and long distance transport, space heating in cold climate, power generation, and some industrial processes like steelmaking, etc. Of course, phasing out carbon-based energy could really be scary for provinces like Alberta or a nation like Canada that's so dependent on its fossil carbon production. But it really doesn't need to be, because we can use our vast fossil fuel and renewable resources to make the zero emission energy carriers of the future hydrogen electricity. By doing this, we can get at least twice the economic return for the energy we produce. Movement to a hydrogen and a net zero energy carrier economy will actually create jobs while addressing climate change.
What do you see as the next steps in hydrogen, short-term and long-term?
First of all, using carbon capture and storage to reduce the carbon intensity of the hydrogen that's already being produced in Canada. The second is we really need to create domestic demand for the low carbon hydrogen to replace probably diesel initially in heavy duty transportation. And then third, to produce low carbon hydrogen and ammonia as a climate friendly energy carrier that we can export to other nations. I'd say the fourth one is the increased use of hydrogen as a fuel for space heating and for industrial heating, even power generation.
Thanks, David. Now, how can the expertise in our hydrocarbon and tech sectors be utilized in hydrogen?
Technology in Western Canada, the hydrocarbon sector is excellent. The hydrocarbon sector already has a lot of expertise, not only in making hydrogen, but in handling it and storing it and using it in a safe way. So I see a very significant role for them in the future. Then in terms of the tech sectors, I think what we're seeing is a lot of new innovations in technology being developed, and we are already seeing lots of companies within Western Canada and across and around the world that are seeing, as hydrogen moves from being an industrial feedstock to a fuel and an energy carrier, it opens up a lot of opportunities for innovation technology development.
Let's talk collaboration. How important is collaboration between sectors during the next 30 years? And have you seen examples of this happening now?
Yeah, I think this is probably, the most important thing. If you think about our electricity and expanding the use of electricity as an energy carrier, it's actually relatively simple. The grid already exists. We already have an electrical grid that connects electricity supply to electricity demand. When you look at hydrogen, we don't. We had to build it from scratch. Most of the hydrogen production today is made right beside the companies that are going to use it as an industrial feedstock. And sometimes in the same plant, they make the hydrogen and immediately use it. So what we're talking about is needing a whole new infrastructure. We need to build a new value chain where you're going to have hydrogen production. You've got to then prepare the hydrogen and so it can be transported either over roads or by pipelines. Then you've got to have the fueling stations. You have to make the vehicles that are going to be able to use the hydrogen. That requires coordination on the entire value chain. And a lot of what that we've been doing in the Transition Accelerator is to try to bring those groups together.
Does Canada have the right infrastructure to produce and use hydrogen at the scale needed? And if not, what needs to happen to attract the right investment?
We need new investments along the entire pathway. Area where we're the weakest is probably the use side. I think the area where we need to focus probably most of our attention in the next few years is developing demand and getting the demand to a scale where the economics works.
All right, David, here is our H+ question. What is your go-to sweet treat?
Sweet treat. Oh, geez. I do kind of like dark chocolate. Dark chocolate's it's kind of a special sweet treat, often with raspberries.
Oh, yes, that sounds so good. And that's a healthy sweet treat too, dark chocolate.
Well, I'd like to think so, but...
Thank you so much, David, for the insightful and informative conversation around hydrogen. It was so great chatting with you today.
Thank you so much.